this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin. Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. I've never been much of a handyman. It's not my DNA. It's just something that I've never felt really confident at it. I've got a lot of friends that are, that can, seem to be able to create something out of absolutely nothing. And that something is like really on the high end as far as quality goes. Now, I have worked on renovations in homes that I've lived in, but, I'm being primarily told what to do. I don't have an eye for design or anything like that. My skill set rests elsewhere. But I can't even begin to imagine that you're some guy that's just bought maybe an old Victorian-style home, big front porch, a porch that you could sit on in the evening and feel the cool breeze, maybe have an adult beverage, or watch the sun come up and have, of course, blessed coffee. But can you imagine being in this home and then saying, I'm going to expand this room, and the first thing I need to do is take this wall out, and suddenly you hit it with a hammer, or maybe you hit it with a sledgehammer, and you begin peeling back those layers. You can see the bare studs there. And you look down, and you notice something kind of white. Maybe the light kind of bounces off of it. And then all of a sudden, you're face to face with a human skull. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, are you a big reno guy? Is that something that's,
I've had to do it, and I'm one of those guys that would rather use my wallet than a hammer. But that's
dig it.
Yeah. Anyway, no, but I've done my share, and I am that guy that will, but only out of necessity. Right now, I got a lot of work that needs to be done. Okay, but when I was reading this story, my first thought was, I got a weird wall in my house. I might ought to take that down. But this just this one boggles my mind, Joe, because if you were doing this in your house and you found a human bone and it's not a joke being played on you, you're going to be just as freaked out as all the rest of us, I would think, maybe even more so, because these things don't crawl themselves there on Halloween night. It doesn't happen like that. Somebody had to have put this skull in the wall and hidden it there.
Why? I think the big question is, why would you hide a skull?
Right.
Because I actually have been called to scenes, Dave, over the course of my career. I've had this happen in New Orleans and Atlanta, where independent of one another, two separate cases where I've had people that have gone to another person's house and have borne witness in said house to human remains.
What?
One person, yeah.
You and I travel in much different circles, man.
Well, they don't call the medical examiner the coroner when you're having a good day. All right. But yeah, I mean, I remember one fellow in particular he went all in on Edgar Allan Poe. He had come across a human skull, and it wasn't like some kind of recreation, something that had been created in plastic. In fact, this was a legit human skull, and he had it up on a shelf, and there was candle wax all over it. And he had literally, like I said, Edgar Allan Poe, had melted a candle on top of the skull and had illuminated the space that he was in with the skull. And this is nothing new under the sun or under the candlelight, because people have done this for years and years and years. I know I'm going to get slapped down for this, but I'll go ahead and say it. There is actually, I think it might be in Portugal. It's either Portugal or Spain. Forgive me. There is a chapel in the underground catacombs. The chapel itself, the whole chapel is made out of bone, made out of human bone, and this thing is massive. There's even a high altar in there with bones. You've got a regular, it looks like a pulpit, chairs, all kinds of stuff. And this thing has been created over, I think it's called an ossuary. I think that's what it's referred to as. It's like a collection site for human bones. And for years and years, it's how people built these things out. Human remains have been used in the past for decorative purposes. You'll come across those as a death investigator many times, or people will question. And it turns out many times, people will just show up at an ME's office with a bone and they'll say, "What is this?" And of course, I can look at certain things and say, it's not human. It's too, the bone is too robust. And it turns out that it's generally, like a hog bone or something like that. Oh, but the utility of bone for many people, and it's not all serial killers that have bones.
No, but I would not be inviting people to a church that was made out of bones. Hey, these are the people that here, come up to this altar. This is altar made out of people who would not get baptized. Okay, that's a big deal here. I mean,
yeah, you're right, and I think that some of it is done. I think that sometimes during our past, people have done it as a necessity. Okay. Mm-hmm. However,
go get me a log, son. Hey, Dad, I couldn't find it, but I found Timmy. Let's grab this.
Yeah. You look at it, you think, wow, what drives you to this point where you're going to do this?
Wow.
I think, in our funerary practices are certainly different than they used to be. And a lot of the stuff is regionalized too. You have to look at that.
Wow.
But anytime you find a human remain, it bears, I would think, looking into it. And
yeah,
yeah, exactly. And so can you imagine Terry? And this wall would not have been normal. And again, forgive my misuse of the words or whatever, but I think this is before the days where you have insulated walls, it's got, fiber insulation in there, and then you've got drywall that's on there. Mm-hmm. This would have been, I think they call it strip lath or strip. I think that's what it is. And it's these small strips of wood that are essentially nailed to the studs, and then it's plastered over.
Wow.
And when that happens, it begins to degrade over a period of time. You'll see these old walls that have waves in them. And I've had to help renovate some of these things. And it's fascinating what you find in the cubby holes, between the studs. You'll find old newspaper in particular. Some people use stuff newspaper down in between the walls. That's not a fire hazard. Yeah. And they would put old newspapers beneath the flooring to add a layer of a barrier. Remember, this is before the days of plastics and all these things. And then they would nail the floorboards down on top of it. I know one house that I was helping to renovate, and the interior wall of the walls, I guess is how you would say it. I remember tearing off a big hole in the wall, in this plastered wall, and looking through with a flashlight. And the first thing that caught my eye was actually a grocery sale advertisement from 1927.
Whoa.
I know. And that was just in the 20s, but man, Dave, I got to tell you, the case that we're talking about today goes a bit further back than the 1920s.
You set it up pretty good at the very beginning. This happens in 1978. We're about 40 3 miles west of Chicago in Illinois. James Skinner is the man's name. He's doing some renovations on the home, and he finds a skull. He looks closer, finds other items that don't belong in a wall or behind baseboards or anything else for that matter, and he calls police like you would do. The investigators come to the house, and the reason is, I'm wondering, Joe, you find a skull and a few other things in the wall that aren't supposed to be there, and your first thing is call the police so they know I didn't kill somebody, boil them down, and stash them in here. And my thought is, can you tell if, because I'm thinking the skull and bones or whatever else they found in between the wall might have been pretty well preserved. Would you be able to tell just by a cursory glance the age of a skull or bones that you find that have been in a protected environment?
Yeah, you could. Yeah, you can. And look, I mean, the most obvious thing here, Dave, is if you have a human skeletal remain that you're examining, it goes without saying, if the body is left on the ground outside, right, to decay, there are certain things that you're going to pick up on when you do your examination that nature will have, had greater access to the remain. And of course, it'll be weathered to a great degree. It might be, portions of it will be completely non-existent, perhaps, because you've had animals coming and going all these years. You're certainly subjected to rain, freezing and heating, and bones are not beyond like freezing and contracting, that sort of thing, and you'll get little fracture lines in them as a result of that. You'll actually see plants growing through bone. Interesting. I helped do a recovery on a body one time of a Civil War soldier that had just been accidentally found. Actually, the fellow that had reburied the remains, long story, but had reburied the remain 40 years earlier when he discovered it, had just dropped the skull in place. Well, Dave, there were oak tree saplings growing up through the skull. And so, you never know. But, when you have a skull inside of a wall, right, it will be protected. Well, what things could get to it? Well, obviously, it's still going to be heat, hot and cold. This is, by the way, in Batavia, Illinois. You had mentioned outside of Chicago, right, which arguably is one of the coldest places I've ever been in my life. Colder, of course, as you approach the lake, in my opinion. And so it's it's kind of hostile, but it's not hostile to the degree where it's going to be out there open and weathered. The bone itself is going to take on kind of there's a yellowish patina that takes place with the bone over a period of time. It becomes it almost looks like parchment paper to a certain degree, and it yellows. The longer it goes, the more yellow it will get. And actually, there's a smoothing of the bone that takes place too. It'll have almost like a, sometimes if it's in a protected area, almost a glass-like sheen to it. So yeah, it does change. And the only animals that are really going to have access to the skull are going to be rats, rodents that'll get in there, and they will gnaw on bone. And there's plenty of examples of people that I know that might be interested in this sort of thing. There's a difference between if you see a human remain that has been cannibalized, which means consumed by another human, as opposed to scavenged, which means that you have someone as if they're a person. You have an animal that comes along, and it's the marks that, say, a rat leaves on a bone are going to be completely different than what human teeth marks will be. When you've got this gnawing going on with rats in particular, they've got the prominent central incisors, and they'll drag them across the surface, and you'll see these very prominent striated areas where rats have been chewing. And they do the same thing on long bones too. So you'll see it on the skulls. You'll see it on long bones, primarily with the skull. So one of the things that will disappear really quick. are any of the leading edges. Like if you've got the orbits, the superorbital ridge that's up top, if it's a protruding feature, they can get their little claws on it and begin to chew through that. And also the mastoid bone, which if everybody listen to my voice, will take your right index finger and put it directly behind your ear. There's kind of a knot right there. Well, that's the mastoid. And they'll get to that and they'll begin to chew on that. So there, when you get into this area, that's why anthropology is so I'm a frustrated anthropologist at heart, because it's something I never got to practice. I was just around them, had friends that were anthropologists, and the things that they get to study to look for minute details is quite fascinating. And certainly this case in and of itself is very fascinating.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
What do you do at this point? You're sitting here, you're just minding your own business. You're not, you expect to open up the wall and it's just going to kind of be dead space. And well,
That's
I guess
probably
you
not the
can
right
take
term
that,
to use.
Dave, and run with it, right?
Yeah.
Boy, I walked right into that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, you look down and you've got a skull here. And the first thing that everybody always does is that they call 911.
Right.
Or back then, I guess back then, Dave, for our younger friends out there, you dial 0.
Yeah.
This was 1978.
Wow. Yeah.
You remember that? You call the operator, and the operator
Give me the
calls
police.
cops. Give me the police. Yeah, famously and everything.
Wow.
I bet people nowadays that are not familiar with that, they probably think, wait, call 911. You are calling the police. No, in the movies, you used to have to call the operator.
Think about it.
And say, give me the police.
There used to be songs made up of calling numbers like Beechwood 45789.
759, yeah.
Anyway, they did the first thing, and that's when we were looking at this story, picking up the phone and calling the police saying, I found a skull. That's to protect yourself from being accused of killing somebody, first and foremost. Second is, I found a skull. I don't know what to, I mean, unless you are Clyde Snow, unless you are an American forensic anthropologist that has seen these things before, you don't know what it is. And I bring up Clyde Snow's name because he is that guy. Back in the day, in the 1970s, Clyde Snow had done everybody from JFK to John Wayne Gacy. He has been in so many books and things I've read over a period of time that it still boggles my mind how he really did become the source. Now, we didn't have the internet was not it. There was a connection of computers and phone lines in 1978, but it wasn't like this. You know, it wasn't like we have now.
No, it's not. And whoever, Dr. Snow did get involved.
How does that happen, though, Joe? I am kind of curious because, all right, you call the police. Who did the police call? Who are you going to call?
Well, the medical examiner.
Okay.
The medical the coroner. Illinois is a coroner state. Okay. And we can have a whole discussion about that another time, but it is, in fact, a coroner state.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this particular county, which, Dave, I was thinking about this. You know what was going on up there approximating this location in 1978?
Was it Gacy?
It was Gacy.
I'll be dogged.
It was, but
wow.
If I remember
John Wayne Gacy.
If memory serves me correctly, this would have been, kind of approximating that time. And I don't think that I don't know. I'm speaking out of school, but what I'm saying is back during that time, if you remember the late 70s, people were in a feeding frenzy over serial killers.
Right.
It occupied everything, they were in the news everywhere. And I would think that this gentleman that was renovating the house in 1978, he would have had some kind of awareness. And that, you're talking about sending a chill up and down your spine when you open a wall and you see a skull there. you're thinking, oh my heavens, what in the world has happened? What occurred here? So yeah, the police, after you call 0 and ask for the police will show up, and they'll probably send. Back then, they probably sent a detective out there, but they would have called the medical examiner, and the medical examiner, or the coroner rather, would have maybe dispatched their people there and sent the item. They would have collected the item and any other, because there were other little bone chips that were found in there. I'll tell you something, there was another disturbing item that I saw that they found in. I don't know why this is disturbing. I have no idea, but for me, there was something creepy about it, because they found a bonnet in there.
Oh.
And bonnets go back, that's something from the Victorian era. Ladies would wear these bonnets that were kind of starched and poking out. There's always been something kind of creepy about them to me. And then you find the skull, and then you find a bonnet that's in there with it. And you're thinking, I can only imagine, Dave, I had this wild thought. I was thinking, oh my God, somebody killed someone, and it was a lady, and they cut her head off and left a bonnet on it.
Wow.
And maybe over time it just kind of fell to the side, which is kind of odd, in and of itself. And how has the bonnet remained intact? Because that's going to be a textile. How is it not fallen apart? I think that goes to how well things can be preserved when they're stuffed down into an area like this, as opposed to being, if the bonnet had been even buried, in just dirt.
Okay.
Just regular
All
dirt.
right. Now let me back up a minute, because you mentioned John Wayne Gacy. I look, John Wayne Gacy was apprehended in December of 1978. This skull was found in 1978. So if you can imagine, this, if you find you're finding human bones in your wall, and you call the police, they're going to look at it and kind of go, well, obviously, this is not a recent murder, and you didn't hide these, or you wouldn't have called us.
No.
But by the time they get around to I don't even know where they begin in 1978, but then all of a sudden you've got John Wayne Gacy making the headlines, because under his crawl space, under his house, you got 30 plus bodies in various stages of breaking down. And
literally, they are literally in. We ought to do an entire episode on this, kind of the stratification that went on there. But yeah, you literally are having bodies that are decomposing on top of other remains that have been there already for a longer time. And this guy, Dave, he had to have had an awareness of this happening. In pretty close proximity to where he was.
Yeah.
And so that adds another layer. And can you imagine when this hit the news up there at that point in time in 78, and people are thinking, oh my God, not another one,
Oh,
and
golly.
it's just, sometimes it's just dumb luck, that comes into play, where you'll have this kind of intersection of these moments. But I got way off track here. Let
me bring it back to Clyde Snow for a minute, because they had to identify this. They had to figure out, what do we have? And your first thing is, what is it? How old is it? Those are going to be the two questions we're after, because is this a recent skull, a recent missing person? What do we have? Even in we tend to look back on things now and base the timing on what we can do now with DNA and everything else that we can do with computers and things like that. But, in 1978, we didn't think we were in the Stone Ages. We were talking about how advanced we were at the time, and how they could, use blood and different things to figure out who this person was. So not realizing how ancient it tends to look now. At the time, they were on the cutting edge. They had ways to figure this out they didn't have before.
Yeah, you're right. You're certainly right about that. But when back then, though, you didn't have, the best you could do is try, and I'm talking about nowadays.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the idea of trying to understand who the person is.
See, I think now you could just enter the drop of their blood, and it would come back with a DNA profile and their whole family tree. I know we're not there yet, but that's what I feel like we are half the time.
Yeah. It's not necessarily that simple. That's why, when we think about our dear friends at Othram and what they're doing, and the, I don't know, it's as close to, for me, this is my own personal assessment. It's it's God's work. I
Right.
mean, when I look at it and I think about what you're trying to do here, and trying to, let people know who an individual might be, and I'm not going to get on my soapbox about hating the word closure, but it's just a matter of just giving, providing information. But then, the skull was actually removed by the coroner. The coroner actually took it to the University of Northern Illinois, and it's over in, I think it's DeKalb, Illinois. It's further to the west than even Batavia is, but it's almost in a direct line. Well, I would imagine in 78 they had an anthropology department. And when you go to an anthropology department at a university, there's no guarantee you're going to have forensic anthropologists there. Matter of fact, they're rare as hen's teeth. You don't come across them just anywhere. They're generally at even larger universities that are doing a lot of research. But whoever it was that was there had the good sense to know that they needed to bring in the pro. And so that's who Dr. Clyde Snow was. And I think at that time he was at the University of Oklahoma. I think that was during his tenure. And it would be a major undertaking, Dave, just to try to peg him down to get your hands on him, because he was in such demand.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that he had consulted on the Gacy trial.
Yep.
But or the Gacy cases. But here's the thing, Clyde Snow was, Central America was in total turmoil back then. And there were a lot of political killings, that sort of thing. And Dr. Snow was being brought to Central America to exhume these mass graves, just to try to get not necessarily an ID, but you would look at those bodies buried in those locations, and he would try to give back a report, generally to somebody like the UN, for instance, to say this is the group of people demographically that they're killing. These are all military age males, for instance. And you can investigatively, you can kind of get an idea, particularly these people that do war crimes and that sort of thing. Are they killing all of the women of childbearing age?
Right.
Or they're going through and they're killing all of the children.
So that's what he was doing there?
He was doing,
Wow.
He was moving all over the world doing this sort of stuff. And there was a real need for his skill set, because when you're looking at a bone, you're at such a disadvantage when compared to, say, your friends that are working in forensic pathology that are examining the fresh dead. The biggest obstacle you have to overcome is that there's no soft tissue to examine at all. In most cases, you're not going to have soft tissue. You can't appreciate hemorrhage and all of that.
Wow.
But back to Northern Illinois, they felt that it would be in their best interest, and for the coroner as well, to make sure that Dr. Snow got his hands on the skull to take a look. And, Dave, you said something interesting a moment ago about how we can use a skull, for instance, in order, or some element of the skeleton to get an ID. Now, we're going to extract DNA. But one of the things that DNA will not provide to you is an assessment of discovered skeletal remains relative to what brought about their death. And I think that Clyde Snow, any anthropologist, a physical anthropologist, I think probably can do a racial assessment or an age assessment, maybe even a stature assessment. But it takes somebody like Clyde Snow to come in and actually say, okay, I've got a skull. I don't see any kind of trauma here that would give you the impression that this was somebody that had had their head chopped off or was beaten to death, because there's no underlying fractures. And so he would take that big chomp out of it. And from an investigative perspective, if you have somebody like Clyde Snow saying, all right, we ain't looking at a homicide here, you have to take your investigation in a different direction. And the beauty of what they found took them into an area that perhaps most people don't ever think of.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn sensational.
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining this sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
We have human remain that is sequestered in a specific location. That goes to, at least in my mind, it makes me think, well, this is something nefarious that's happening here. Because why do you go to the trouble of obscuring or hiding a human remain? And of all places, you stick it in a wall? Why would you do that? It doesn't make sense. Or, are you some kind of twisted maniac that's collecting human remains? Well, no, because it's found in singular, so they're not collecting like body parts here, where they're, like sitting there and looking at them day after day and creating a huge pile. It's not like that. You have to look elsewhere. And so, but still, this could be a homicide. And what's the old adage about homicide? There's no statute of limitations. So, yeah, they know it's older, but they don't know how old. And you could still have individuals that could still be alive.
That's what I was going to ask you.
This individual.
Can you really tell between 10 years and 100 years? If they're in a controlled environment.
Yeah, I think that probably they could at least, when forensic anthropologists talk to you, I'm not going to, don't misinterpret this, anybody. It's not that they're not speaking in absolutes. There are some absolutes in science, but with there are many absolutes in science, by the way. With something like this, forensic anthropologists give you bracketed time. None of them are going to say, yeah, this is within the last year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess they could, but you'd have to have, there are certain circumstances that you have to consider. So the further down the timeline you move with a human body, it gets the dwindles from an evidentiary standpoint. You're losing more and more and more and more. So they might say, it's 50 to 100 years old. Okay. That's kind of bracket that you're looking at here. It's really hard to begin to narrow it down. And so when you get that bit of physical information or assessment, you have to take that back and kind of plug it in with any other data that you would have here. You'd need to research who owned the house, who occupied the space, occupationally, what did they do? And I don't really know how far they took that assessment. When Clyde Snow would have gotten his hands on the remain, he would have followed up and said that he would confirm what the earlier forensic or the earlier anthropologist had said. Yeah, this is, and in this case, he thought that it was a young female, younger female, that when he looked, he could give them a racing of the skeletal remain. Again, we're talking about a skull. You talk about what race is she? Well, he concluded that she's Caucasian. When you're continuing to assess, you're going to try to determine if there's any kind of indwelling disease that would present on the bone, like tuberculosis or something like that you might see just with the unaided eye. And after that, you're going to look for butcher marks on here. Anything on the skull that would give you an indication that a steel object or metal object had made contact with a bone, like a decapitation or maybe surgical interventions, things like this. You'll do that kind of trauma assessment. And then you have to try to understand, is this antemortem or is it postmortem? And again, that's very difficult to determine, particularly the further out you get. There's actually a big area where you can do assessments, and I've seen them do it. They'll refer to a human remain as a medical specimen. And so you think about that, you plug that in, and you say, well, why in the world would somebody have a medical specimen? Because many times those those types of skeletal remains will have a particular appearance to them. They will give you an indication of that you had some rudimentary attempts to do a dissection, perhaps, and the type of blade that was used, and all of that. And that kind of assessment would have to go through tool mark examination. But it was very broad strokes back then, during this time period, as to how do you assess a remain, particularly when you have no idea who the person is. And that launches us into the time that we're in right now, because it's amazing. We're almost in this time of scientific miracles, if you will, that you and I, we were talking about our age group earlier. You and I, we could not have fathomed this sort of thing happening when we were kids. No way. And now Othram has opened up a door, Dave, that otherwise would have never have been possible. That's why all this is so mind-blowing. Where, because the technology that they have and their ability to combine both science and, to a certain degree, art, I guess, with the combination of DNA, modern DNA technology, and the use of an in-house genealogy staff, they're able to call upon these open databases that are out there with the samples that they have, and be able to, perhaps construct a family tree. And and they're thematically, one of the things that they say is they help families get the answers they deserve. And here's the thing, Dave, in our case from Batavia, you're not even going to have a sense that you're related to somebody,
right?
That this is actually an ancestor of yours. Can you imagine somebody showing up and contacting you out of the blue and saying, "Hey, yeah, we think we have the remain of one of your ancestors here. It showed up in a DNA match that this company down in Texas, in the Woodlands, Texas, north of Houston, they've structured this thing out, and hey, man, all signs point to you." And you get this this bolt out of the sky, where you wind up having an actual match for somebody that has long been dead, Dave.
Esther Ann Granger.
Yeah, and it turned out she was they found out a connection. Now get this, and I don't understand enough about genealogy to understand the kind of framing of this, but he was her second great grandson or great great grandson, I think. This person that they have identified in life here. So does that mean that she did not survive the childbirth, but her child did, and then she was entombed after that? And remember what I had mentioned about the Medical College of Georgia just a few seconds ago, Dave. People don't realize that gross anatomical study, like where young want-to-be physicians are offered an opportunity to stand alongside a dead body and do detailed dissection. That's something that is a recent manifestation in perhaps just the last, I don't know, just over a century, because there were a couple of reasons. First off, I think they probably would have had more difficult time preserving bodies, but the biggest thing was that there was an aversion by government officials and by the public to allow the dead to be dissected. Isn't that amazing?
Desecration.
And so if you were some kid attending medical school and you didn't actually get to touch a dead body to do a dissection, a gross anatomical dissection, it puts you at somewhat of a disadvantage as you're trying to become a clinician. You imagine that?
No, I had no idea that this was a thing.
And it was forbidden. So they would hire, in the case of the Medical College of Georgia, they actually had, I think they were either slaves or maybe they had become free men. Prior to the Civil War, they had these gentlemen that were assigned by the medical school to go out and rob freshly buried bodies, rob the graves, and bring them back. And can you imagine being in the space with maybe a whale oil lamp, and in the dark of the night, because it's illegal what you're doing, and you're dissecting these bodies out just to try to understand human anatomy so you can better treat your patients in the future.
So you can save lives in the future using a dead person to help save lives.
Yeah, and so this is not some. And let me tell you one more thing, if you like that one. I've actually worked as an autopsy assistant. Let's see, how can I say this? It was in Georgia, and I was doing extra work on the side. And there was one location I would go to in Georgia where there was a medical school, and I would only work weekends at this location with this old doctor who I really admired. Dave, when I would arrive at 7:00 in the morning to open up the door to go in and do the autopsies, we would have a line of medical students from the local medical school because they didn't have enough bodies in their gross anatomy. And this is modern times.
Wow.
And they were willing to do anything in the morgue. I mean, just so that they could have access to, and this was years and years ago. It's probably changed now, but, and look, I want that in a physician. I want a physician that's thirsty for knowledge.
Right.
And how do you balance this out? Well, back then when Esther died, they saw this as a reasonable solution. Now they could have all gone to jail for it, but yet her grave was apparently disturbed and robbed, and it turned out to be this young woman who died in childbirth when there wasn't great prenatal care.
Right.
You had a lot of women that died in childbirth back then, but apparently her child may have survived and went on to be a solution to a huge mystery, which of course was solved some, 175 years later, Dave.
Yep. They were able to determine that Esther was one of 6 children. She was born 170 in October 26, 1848. October 26, 1848. Wow. And investigators believe, of course, like we told you, that she was 17 when she died through complications of childbirth in 1866.
So she had made it all the way through the Civil War.
Yeah.
Civil War had ended the year before, and gone through all this, had borne witness to these incredible times that those people survived, and she passed on at childbirth. I think about how the family is impacted now. These generations later, I would love to have a cup of coffee with one of them and say, just what thoughts come to mind, when you think about that you're connected to this person. So many of us, wonder who we're connected to in the distant past, and try to understand, from what did we come, who are these people? And even in her very short life, she had borne witness to a lot of things, and of course died, trying to give birth to the next generation of her family. But, it's because of Othram that this mystery is now solved. That, of course, and the help of the individuals that decided to chip in. And you too can participate in assisting Othram in their endeavors here to, I think, to wipe out those names that are on our NamUs list, the National Database of Unidentified Persons. And you can donate anything you want, and you can choose the case that you want to donate toward. All they have to do is hit $7,500, and they can get started on an investigation, and maybe give families some answers, maybe give descendants some answers. But check them out, and if you go to DNAsolves.com, DNAsolves.com, you can see the cases that need assistance there. Maybe something will strike your fancy, or maybe someone that has an unidentified human remain that you would like to get assistance in solving the case. You can contact them and let them know and get the wheels turning. But anyway, that's DNAsolves.com. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.